for us to be exploring with these animals in the future. So I'm going to do a brief foray here into a few studies from other labs, with the point being that what we're learning here with these slugs and snails is not so very different from what you learn from other animals. And that's one of the big points here. These aquatic animals are all doing very similar things underwater. So I'm going to start with salmon. Salmon, as I expect most of you already know, have extraordinary life cycles where they are born in the riverbed in riverbeds, and as young fish they migrate out to sea, and then after some number of years return to swim back upstream, okay, towards their natal rivers. And their fidelity to their natal nesting site, so going back to the same site that their parents laid eggs in, that they hatched from, is remarkable. These are examples of West Coast salmon swimming upstream, in this case, in a river that has flooded over a road. So this behavior, of course, is truly astounding. This migration out to sea, several years out of sea, find their way back to the same river mouth, and then head upstream. And yet, if you follow what the animals are doing in the rivers, they're doing something remarkably similar to what the snails and slugs do. Here are tracks of 3 salmon. This is from work by Kiefer and Cottle a few years ago. And what they showed is that the animals, okay, adult A and C here were born up this tributary, where adult B was born up this tributary. And what they're doing is they are heading upstream, okay, when they detect the odors that are characteristic of their natal nesting site. They can smell the stream bed, essentially. And if they lose those odors, then they switch to either swimming across current or even down current. So this then leads them, okay, upstream, lose the odors, go cross stream, upstream, cross stream, and then upstream. So this is Odour-Gated Rheotaxis. They are doing essentially the exact same thing that the snails are doing to find their natal streams. And if they go up the wrong direction, well, then they realize after some time that no, I'm really not smelling the odors that I imprinted on, and so they'll actually turn around fully downstream and then get it right the next time they go to take another turn. So salmon do this. You might also ask the question, well, how did they find the river mouth in the first place? And the thought or it's not the thought, there is experimental evidence that's based on responses to the Earth's magnetic fields. The data there is not as strong, though, as in sea turtles. So I'm going to talk briefly about sea turtles. These also have extraordinarily long distance navigation behaviors. They too return to the same beaches that they were born in. So the females lay eggs after mating. Those eggs incubated for a certain time. The hatchlings hatch out. They head out to sea for some number of years, and then they come back to the same beach to lay their eggs. And this navigation behavior involves a number of different cues. Interestingly, at least to start with, they do use light. You would have noticed that up to this point, I haven't mentioned light because light does not get used very much underwater because in many cases, water is murky, and so seeing is very difficult. But these turtles do spend a short period of time on land, and for that, they do use light. This is a time-lapse view of some loggerheads hatching, and you'll notice the extraordinary precision of their navigation behavior. They are heading to the ocean, which is over here, and they can only just see it because this is done at night, where naturally there's no lights. This scene is illuminated by infrared lighting, and then there's an infrared camera. That doesn't help the turtles. But what they can see is either starlight or moonlight reflected off the surf of the beach. So the evidence suggests that these animals are actually using vision to find the surf before swimming off. And this has actually caused massive efforts in areas where humans have constructed resorts all along these same beaches, because light pollution was causing massive casualties of hatchling sea turtles as they crawled the wrong way, away from the ocean. So there's, when you go to these places now, you'll find that the lighting is always done in a way that it's not detectable by the hatchling sea turtles. They use wavelengths and dim lighting, frankly, to not interfere with their navigation. Okay, but once they get back into the water, well, then there's plenty of evidence that they're using magnetic fields. Okay, so this is a diagram showing the Atlantic Ocean. Here's the North Atlantic gyre. It goes around and around and around. And these hatchling loggerheads want to spend several years in this. And what they appear to do is use a magnetic sense to detect where they are on the planet so as to adjust their swimming effort, so that that tends to keep them in this gyre and not have them get caught up in the Gulf Stream and swept away up here into the more Arctic regions where they will eventually die. So if you test animals, okay, by placing them in a system that manipulates the magnetic field around them, but allows them to still swim tethered so you know which direction they want to swim in, you'll find that here, if you trick them into thinking they are here because of the magnetic fields, this is their preferred direction. All of these dots are the actual averages for a bunch of hatchling sea turtles, and the average direction is this red arrow, right along the path of the gyre. If you give them this location, they don't know what to do. They have no adaptive response to that, which is hardly surprising because any of the turtles that ended up there would have been removed from the gene pool. They would end up dying. If you give them this location here, right at this bifurcation point, they have a very strong tendency to swim south, to stay within the gyre. And over here, they want to head west, and so on. There's a number of studies, very elegant work by Ken Lohman and his students over the last 20 to 30 years, showing this extraordinary ability these animals have to use magnetic fields. So the question then becomes, looping back, could our slugs also be using this, given that we find so many similarities in other aspects of aquatic navigation behavior across animals? Skipped a section because I'm running a little over time. So here's a hypothesis. Tritonia, our sea slugs, uses magnetoreception during crawling. And to start with here, because we don't really know how they might be using it, certainly slugs have no equivalent long-distance migration behavior that the turtles do. We're going to take a super simple approach. We're going to put some bar magnets out that have varying strengths. And we're going to allow slugs to move around them. And because of the varying strengths, the magnets are going to have larger and larger zones of influence, we'll call it. And if the slug's behaviors changes in a way that increases in distance from the magnets, then we'll have some evidence that the animals are using magnetic fields for something in their navigation behavior. This is a very crude test, okay? But it's our first attempt at this. What this requires is huge amounts of tracking of slugs around magnets. So this is 6 different views of cameras, similar to what you saw earlier, but this time with the tracking data shown. This is an extraordinary amount of effort for one of my previous students, Theora Holden. So after tons and tons of effort, we then looked to compare what the animals did close versus far from magnets. So if there's something different between these two that changes as we make the magnets bigger and bigger, okay, then we'll have evidence that the slugs are being affected by the magnetic field. And so we're going to compare how their headings change, the distances they move, okay, their displacements, which is a slightly different measure of distance, their speeds, and then how much they wind in tortuous paths or straight paths. And to bring us long story short, only one thing was affected. We've got all of these different metrics. Don't worry about the abbreviations. The key is there's things like distance or tortuosity, velocity. We've got our strong, medium, weak, and control magnets. So no magnetic field disruption, a little bit, medium amount, a lot. And you can see for each of these metrics, there's essentially no difference. But look at this one. Control magnets, no distortion. Here's a weak distortion, big, medium distortion, and a strong distortion. This is exactly the pattern we hypothesized would happen. We don't know what it means. And because this was exploratory work, we have to keep our conclusions tentative. But it does appear that Tritonia uses magnetoreception to help navigate. And our hypothesis is it's to help it move in straight lines, because that measurement that was we found the effect on was how much the animals were changing their headings as they moved by the magnets. So it was exploratory data. So that means if we're following appropriate scientific method, we now have to have a planned testing of that hypothesis. And that's in the near future, although we'll see if COVID lets us go to the West Coast anytime soon. Okay. So putting it all together then, I hope I've shown you some evidence that the animals under the water will tend to use odors and flow to move. They also appear to use magnetic fields extensively. And neither of those two is very surprising when you consider how limited visual capabilities can be underwater for navigation. Nonetheless, things like light, gravity, and maybe even sound and other cues are also going to be important for animals helping to find their way. And of course, standing further back, this is all part of a very unsurprising conclusion that animals navigating are going to use essentially any cue that can be associated with a destination. As long as it's there is that association, natural selection will almost certainly allow the animals to exploit it. Okay. And with that, I'm going to just talk for just one more minute on lobster navigation. This is what I hope to be my next project on aquatic navigation. This is still in the conceptual stage. So we have all this evidence from other animals that they use, animals under the water use odors and flow, magnetic fields, light, gravity, etc. What about the lobsters? Well, we already know they use odors and flow. There's a number of other studies in the past from the lab that have shown that. But what about these other possibilities? Well, the key is what we've got to do is figure out what these animals are doing in the field for these studies, because often unpacking the complexity of these things requires natural environments, like with the slugs and what Ken Lohman does with the turtles. So here's an example of lobster navigation. We got some bait in a bag here underneath a video camera. We've got a whole bunch of lobsters hanging out, and here comes a big one navigating in to take control of this food item. And this is very short distance navigation behavior data versus association with a project that has other goals, but has this additional benefit of being able to get short distance navigation behaviors. And so that's going to be a fun exploring over the next couple years. And then beyond that, I want to take advantage of acoustic tagging. So these pingers that you can attach to lobsters. Ocean Tracking Network has already done work with this with a number of groups in the past. And in the same time, other groups over in Europe have used this kind of system to track lobsters, that's what these dotted lines are, around traps. But crucially, they weren't also measuring high detailed information about the flows. And my hope is that the combination of measuring track move